Metroidvanias. Oh boy, it's currently one of the hot genres in the video game industry, and the Nintendo Switch is full to the brim with them. Here at Physical Paradise, I only care about physical goodness, and I'm here to tell you a bunch of Metroidvanias available physically on the system. Now, believe me, I tried to be as thorough as possible. I always was when it came to the visual novels, the horror games, the JRPG list, but Metroidvania is in a whole other league because it can also be so nebulous, with games having hints of it. Plus, many developers and publishers are not willing to label their games as Metroidvanias due to it including a Nintendo trademark. I'm sure Nintendo don't care that much, but who wants to poke the tiger? So I would never claim this one to be definitive, but I think there are enough games in here to last a lifetime. I have not played most of them, and I have gone on the opinions of those online as to whether it's good and if it's a Metroidvania or not. How did I decide? 1. Does the PR or game description mention Metroidvania? 2. Do reviews of the game mention the word Metroidvania enough times and confirm that it is actually a Metroidvania? And 3. Does the Metroidvania subreddit have a consensus on whether it is a Metroidvania or not? So feel free to debate in the comments about what I have included and what I have not included, because that will drive up the much needed engagement. And by the way, it is entirely possible I have missed a good few too, since I actually completely lost my script and all the research that I did near to the end of writing. So I basically had to research and write this thing twice. And by the second time, completely demoralized, I am sure plenty of things have slipped past me, so be polite in the comments suggesting what I have missed. I mean, it's likely I did consider your game of choice, but maybe I didn't think it fitted, wasn't enough of a Metroidvania, or I genuinely just did miss it. If you appreciate the effort, subscribe and leave a like. Let's get on with it. 8 Doors, Arum's Afterlife adventure. We're gonna go alphabetically, so this is first. This is a game published by Red Art Games as you go through the 8 levels of purgatory. It's a game that uses Korean folklore for its setting and vibes, and you can see it has a very striking art style with a monochrome aesthetic with only a smattering of red. The physical is usually found quite cheap these days. 9 Years of Shadows recently had pre-orders open from limited run games but have since closed. I don't know if I like the art style for this one, but it's definitely a bit different. It's somehow both colourful and moody at the same time. The game hasn't been universally loved, but there is positivity about it, with praise for its boss fights and being all round solid, if perhaps unremarkable. Aeterna Noctis is a game that released physically, but only in Europe. North America did not get this physical release. This is a really difficult Metroidvania with supposedly some Souls-like elements in here too. The art style may be a bit unusual. It's dark but quite clean, but it is all hand-drawn, so one should appreciate the effort. Afterimage is a great Metroidvania that had unfortunate performance issues on Nintendo Switch at launch. There were patches, and I believe it's become a much more acceptable experience, but still not ideal. It's a stunningly gorgeous game with lots of variety, huge map, loads of enemies, different endings, just maybe best played elsewhere. Aggelos only got a physical release on Nintendo Switch in Europe, and it looks like something badass that you'd find on the Master System. It's got the colours, it's got the chunkiness, I love it. Sadly, it's not supposed to be the best, but back when it released in Europe, it was a very budget price and did have a lot of charm to it. Alwa's collection contains Alwa's Legacy and Alwa's Awakening, 2 really fantastic games that go for an NES style appearance. They may look humble and nondescript, but this is truly a great double pack of Metroidvanias that you shouldn't miss out on. The first game, Awakening, is good, and then they made the step up to make the sequel even better. Animal Well is a very recent Metroidvania, and it's one of those that launched into the stratosphere far more than most other indie compadres. What makes this one so special? Well, firstly, its visuals are sublime. Call me shallow, but the promotion gifts, it's enough to sell it to me. The gameplay also backs it up too, with very creative gameplay and brings back the joy in exploring. The physical release for this was only done in North America by Limited Run Games. Astalon Tears of the Earth was another one done by Limited Run in North America. This one has gone for an NES style, and wouldn't you know, it's also fantastic. Simple animation, simple physics that has a great balance in terms of its gameplay. Puzzles, action, exploration, all of them are done really well. There are multiple characters to play as who are also upgradable. Very nice game. Astronite is a 1-bit Metroidvania that would not look out of place on a calculator. It's only in black and white. It's a decent but not essential Metroidvania, a bit rough around the edges in terms of its physics and control, so it's not something you'd rush out to buy, but it was a budget physical title, and it shows. Arzette the Jewel of Faramore was a game funded by Limited Run Games, and I think it's one of the best things they've ever done. Way better use of money than porting Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. This is a game that takes inspiration from the CDI Zelda games, but it asks the question, what if they were good? And yeah, it may not star Link or anything, but it's the same art style, same kind of mechanics, but good. And yeah, Limited Run did the physical in North America because of course they did. Axiom Verge 1 and Axiom Verge 2 both got physical releases on the Nintendo Switch in a slightly complicated fashion. The first game was released very on in the Switch's life, but it was kind of rare. But then, when Limited Run picked up Axiom Verge 2, they also did 2 versions of it. One by itself, and another as a double pack with 1 and 2 together. Both supposedly good games. I have the first game on the Wii U, but I've never played the sequel. They are regarded as some of the best in the biz. Beholgar was released physically only in Europe, and this is a low-key Metroidvania. In fact, it doesn't even have a map, which will make most Metroidvania fans gasp in horror. How dare they have to remember directions? But even then, it's not the greatest game. It's hard and a bit glitchy from what I've heard. If you live in North America, there is no rush to import this one, even if you are a huge fan of the genre. Blasphemous 1 and Blasphemous 2 are 2 separate releases and are regarded as some of the best Souls-like Metroidvanias that money can buy. In fact, the first game was almost legendary at the time, as it was one of Limited Run's most revered physical releases. Due to high demand, it did get a later retail release. Blasphemous 2 continued the incredible European Gothic style. I don't think this hit the same heights as the original, but that generally happens with sequels. It's kind of more of the same, which is great but less interesting. Still, certainly worth the purchase. Speaking of which, if you want to purchase any of the games in this video, please check the document I've linked in the description. I've put the entire list of games in there with links to purchase them, if they're still available, of course. Some games are quite old now and are not easy to find brand new, but if you do purchase any of them via the links, it massively helps support me and this channel to make useful video content for you physical collectors, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Blaster Master Zero has had an interesting physical release history. Firstly, Blaster Master Zero 1, 2, and 3 were released individually in North America thanks to Limited Run Games. However, Japan, being the pragmatists that they are, had a much better triple pack of all 3 games together on 1 cartridge and even included some small unique content. Definitely the best way to go. It was previously very difficult to get a hold of, but there was a recent reprint to make it more accessible. Still not cheap though. These 3 games really did the series justice. The original NES game is a cult classic, and this was a really nice attempt from Inti Creates to bring it back to modern day while also retaining the classic gameplay. Bloodstained Ritual of the Night was a very highly anticipated game considering it was developed by Koji Igarashi, who helped define the Metroidvania trope, what with him taking control of the Castlevania series as it developed more RPG and exploration elements into it. It's a decent game, but sadly the performance on Nintendo Switch was, and I think still is, below par, so maybe play it elsewhere if you want to play this one. Blue Fire is a Metroidvania, a 3D one. I wasn't originally going to add 3D games into this list, but then if I ignored a certain Nintendo 3D Metroidvania, there would be riot, so I guess I gotta shove it in. This is a pretty fun indie game. It's nice to see indie devs being a bit more ambitious. Expect lots of precision platforming this one. The physical release for this did release in North America and Europe, but later, Japan got a physical release that was complete on cartridge, including the DLC and all of the updates. So if you're in the market for it now, maybe pick up the Japanese edition. It still plays in English. Bow, Path of the Teal Lotus, is an import-exclusive physical release, a very affordable one in Japan and Asian regions. It's a beautiful game, one of the best-looking platformers I've seen in a long time, and it's got gameplay to back it up too. Beautifully flowing as you're often airborne rather than running around on the ground. Well worth a look and well worth an import. Bookbound Brigade is an import-exclusive Metroidvania, and it's one of the most interesting. Not the best, but interesting, because your power-ups in this one are literary greats from history. That's pretty cool. Due to the physical only being released in Japan and Korea, it's not really talked about much, but you can import it since it does play in English. Castlevania Advance Collection and Castlevania Dominus Collection are two excellent and essential collections of the best Metroidvanias in history. Okay, maybe they're not Symphony of the Night, but they are cut from the same cloth with RPG elements, an anime aesthetic, and each one having a fascinating gimmick to separate it from one another. Limited Run handled both of these collections, only available in North American regions. However, Video Games Plus, linked in the description, still have copies of the Advance Collection, and they will have copies of the even much more essential Dominus Collection in the future, maybe even by the time you're watching this. If you're a fan of Metroidvanias, you must own this, you must, it's by law. Cathedral is one of those don't judge a book by its cover kind of games. This is a fantastic 8-bit inspired Metroidvania, a bit of ghosts and goblins with Metroidvania exploration. This is actually a premium edition games release, and it is their best selling one at the time of writing this. Maybe you don't think so by looking at it, but it is one of those cult classics that once you play, you realize how awesome it is. You can still grab this, at least a standard edition, from VGP with the links below. Catmaze is a cute-vania, basically Metroidvania with cutesy elements. You are a witch who has a wealth of familiars to help battle monsters. Maybe not essential, but surprisingly enjoyable if you picked it up. It was done by Red Art Games, only in Europe, but can often be found cheap these days, even brand new if you wait for the right discount season. And then I do highly recommend it. Chasm. This is touch and go as to whether it's a Metroidvania. It's often tagged as one, but there's also a bit of pushback from reviews saying, to keep your expectations in check. I mean, firstly, it's procedurally generated, which seems like a juxtaposition for the genre, but that aside, you're still getting a really solid game. The physical release was done by Limited Run Games in North America. Chronicles of Two Heroes, Amaterasu's Wrath, is a nice retro ninja-style game with some Metroidvania elements. This has a character switching mechanic between two, each of whom have different and unique fighting styles. It's supposed to be very tough, just like 8-bit games of old, but also quite addictive. This was also only released physically in Europe. Curse of the Sea Rats is a Metroidvania that got mixed reception when it released. Whether due to quality or due to having rats as the main protagonist, I don't know. Well, despite the nice visuals, the controls are supposedly quite stiff and the gameplay balance isn't very good, especially when it comes to combat. However, the game can be found at a reasonable price these days, so maybe it's worth a try. Maybe it got a patch to make things better, I'm not sure. Dandara is a Metroidvania that Super Rare Games did physically many years ago in Europe. They only made 6,000 copies in total, and because it was so long ago, the price is pretty high these days. This is a well-received game where the mode of traversal is quite unique. Dead Cells. Is Dead Cells a Metroidvania? Look, personally, I would say no, but it is tagged as much, and there's enough people to say that it is. So I'm going to include it. If you don't agree, you can just close your ears for 20 seconds, okay? It is extremely roguelike in its gameplay, and it is extremely good. Like a ridiculously good game with so much content, and there's been various physical releases over the years. The one that you'll want to get though is Dead Cells Return to Castlevania, which, while it doesn't have all of it on the cartridge, it does have all of the DLC, so you don't need to purchase anything extra. Setting aside whether it's a Metroidvania or not, it's just an exceptional 10 out of 10 game that everyone should play. Death's Gambit Afterlife is a Metroidvania with supposedly deep RPG elements. It's tough since it has a Souls-like tag to go along with it. It takes its time to warm up to and goes from being a by-the-numbers Metroidvania to an excellent one by the end of the game, so I've heard. Demoniaca Everlasting Night is a seriously rough around the edges game, not least in the visuals, but you have to give credit for trying something unique and bold. It has combat that is very similar to a fighting game with combos. It's a game you have to be patient with, but with so many other options as you can see from this list, it's a tough sell despite its ambition for a low budget game. The physical release of this was only in North America via VGNY. Demons of Asterborg is a game with elements of Metroidvania that's stated explicitly by the developers. Its focus is a bit more with just action platforming straight out of your Mega Drive. It's a bit more linear than true connoisseurs of the genre may enjoy, but with tough gameplay and bosses that seem more like puzzles than pure action skill, it's definitely worth looking into. Disney Illusion Island I didn't expect to be a Metroidvania, but it is, and very randomly this is a Nintendo Switch exclusive. It's not even on PC at the time of making this video. Supposedly a very solid experience taking inspiration from the modern Rayman games. There are 4 characters to choose from who all play the same, and you are quite defenseless, having more to avoid enemies, which is quite quaint in this day and age. Dust and Elysian Tale is one of the most expensive Switch games to purchase if you want to grab it right now. It was one of Limited Run's earlier titles, and I don't think it sold super well, so the print was quite low. Forget a reasonable price, and this is a game that some people think is either the greatest Metroidvania ever made, or they don't get what the fuss is all about. It's a bit polarizing. It's gorgeous though, there is no denying that. Elderand is definitely Elderand and not Elderland, as some places mistakenly write on their website. This is a gore-filled pixel experience with lots of weapon type choices and RPG elements to make a game that's supposedly quite customizable to play. It is the definition of a proper solid title that everyone seems to agree is a good game. Elliot Quest only released physically in North America because it's published by Nicholas. Visually, it's one of the most minimalistic games on this list, and it's not exactly a spring chicken, originally from 2014. In 2025, it doesn't appear to be anything special, but I remember back in the day, it was pretty well received. Ender Lilies Quietus of the Night and Ender Magnolia Bloom in the Mist are 2 essential Metroidvanias, especially the second game, which just recently released. As I continue to make this video, it improves upon the original in every single way, plus knowledge of the first game is not really needed. However, I do still recommend picking up both if possible. Limited Run did the first in North America, but it got a retail release in Europe and Japan. The second game, at the time of making this, only has a physical release in Japan and Asia, but it does have English and is well worth importing. It's easily one of the best games in this list. Exophobia is one of those FPS jobbos that I'm reluctant to add to this list, but hey, Nintendo fans are staring at me very menacingly, so it's in. This is mixed with an old school shooter that's supposedly very good. Nicely fast-paced, interesting presentation. I saw a review on Steam that calls it a Doomvania, and I like that. This only released physically in North America, so if you're European, maybe worth an import. F.I.S.T, forged in Shadow Torch. I just can't get over that name. Fist is such a cursed word these days. Throw in the fact that you got a mechanical rabbit, and it's a recipe for double entendres, but also a recipe for a pretty solid action game. I don't know how well it runs or looks on the Switch, but it's definitely got a bit of budget about it. Finding Teddy 2 is a very obscure physical release that only got a physical release in Europe, also known as Chronicles of Teddy on Steam. It plays a bit like Zelda 2, a lot of comparisons to that, which is interesting, quite tough, lacking in polish, but it is well regarded thanks to its charm. Sadly, picking up a Switch physical is not cheap these days no matter which cover version you look for. They're all like $60 or something, which doesn't sound like much compared to some other releases on this list, but when it originally released, it was a budget price. Gal Guardian Servants of the Dark is an upcoming Metroidvania and a bit of a departure from the original, which was more like a run-and-gun platformer. I guess Inti Creates decided to go back to doing what they do best with tightly designed Metroidvanias, only this one is starring girls from the Gal Gun series. How can one go wrong? Gato Roboto has had 2 physical releases, one from Special Reserve where they sent everyone a broken cartridge that probably tanked the company, and it was also more recently available in a triple pack called the Doink Soft Collection. And that's where it fits better since it's a game that's only a few hours long and very suited for speedrunning. Very tightly made, really fun time. Ghost 1.0 plus an Epic Collection is a double pack of 2 Metroidvanias, the physical of which was exclusive to Play Asia. Both look different but are made by the same people. Ghost 1.0 is the star of the show, so I'm told, with its sci-fi aesthetic. It can also be picked up pretty cheap these days if you wait for a sale on Play Asia. Ghost Song really stands out with its art style, very atmospheric as it infuses cosmic horror into its themes. It's got the gameplay to back it up as well, with supposedly well balanced difficulty, a good curve that's not easy or not too hard. It's leaning more towards the Metroid style for the genre than Vania, if that's more to your taste, and it is available to be picked up pretty affordably. Greek Memories of Azure. Speaking of affordably, this is one of the cheapest to pick up in Europe. Here there are 3 characters to control, each with their own unique purpose, and can help solve puzzles in this one, It's a bit more simplistic than other games in the genre, but sometimes that's a good thing depending on what you're in the mood for. Grime was released physically in Europe by Super Rare Games, but did see a more wider release in Japan and Asia with English. This is one that's got some mixed opinions. Some will say it's the best Souls-like Metroidvania they've ever played, while others find some gameplay mechanics obtuse and lacking in polish. It also doesn't run super great on the Switch, so if you must play it, perhaps play it elsewhere. Guacamelee 1-2 Punch Collection is what it says, a 1-2 punch to the face with awesomeness. The original Guacamelee game was one of the first indie games that made people think, hey, no, these indie guys can make Metroidvanias just like the big boys. Both games have received universal acclaim with its tongue-in-cheek attitude, pop culture references, that sort of stuff. The physical is certainly worth picking up for a double helping of quality. Hack is another super rare game, another pretty well regarded one. The combat is thought to be the weakest aspect, maybe a bit too simple for some, but the game has the most focus on platforming, which is done well thanks to the abilities you get along the way. Maybe shouldn't be top of your list as a fan of the genre, but one to think about if you like cyberpunk aesthetics. Haiku, the Robot, another Super Rare Games release, this time one that's regarded as an entry point for the genre. Not that the genre needs baby steps, but it's an easy one to get into. The visual style is certainly reminiscent of like a Game Boy Color or Neo Geo Pocket Color game, and I like that. It's supposed to be short, sweet, and approachable, just like me. And also you're a cute little robot, which I'm not. Hollow Knight. Well, it's this one, right? This is the game that opened up 1,000 inspirations, set a new standard for quality and affordability. It's ridiculously cheap to buy this digitally and has people absolutely clamoring for a sequel, which is taking an eternity, which it can do because they sold so many copies of this one, the developers can basically retire themselves and their kids. Hollow Knight gets pretty much universal praise as being the pinnacle or tentpole Metroidvania release on modern systems. And while every game as universally loved as this one will have a few loud people saying that they just don't see the appeal, it's popular for a reason. An incredible game in every aspect that you should have in your collection. Horus is another physical from Super Rare Games, and this one feels very British. Not sure why, I've never played it, but the name and the bowler hat give me, that's British. Made by just a couple of people, this is considered a very, very good game. The phrase Metroidvania isn't thrown around much with this game, but the devs literally have it in their PR, so it's in. as you do unlock new robot abilities to access more areas. It won't be at the tip of anyone's tongue when asked about obvious Metroidvanias on the Switch, but it has elements that means it shouldn't be discounted. Iconoclast was a game done by Limited Run Games in North America, and it's one that has small elements of Metroidvania. Again, it's tagged as such. It's quite a lot more linear than most in the genre, lots of puzzle to solve, and a slight open world. If you go in expecting a full Metroidvania, you will be disappointed, but if you just want a great game, it's one worth a look at. Indivisible is a Metroidvania secondary, acting mostly as a wingman to the side-scrolling RPG combat gameplay. I almost considered not putting it in this list, but here it is anyways, and it makes it one of the most unique entries in this video, as you have platforming and exploration, but when you bump into an enemy, you jump into turn-based combat that resembles the Mario and Luigi games where you time button pressers. It's a really good-looking game, but not considered one of the best. Infernax looks like your classic NES Castlevania game, but it is more than that. With RPG customization, consequence-based decisions, and Metroidvania exploration, many would say that if it released on the NES back in the day, it would be considered one of the best games of the generation. Limited Run did this in North America, but it did get a retail release in Europe, but even that's not cheap to get these days. It only had a very low print, which is a shame because it deserves to be played by more people. Can we get a reprint? Come on, guys. Islets is a game that was published physically by Super Rare Games and is a pretty fun, solid game. A little on the short side, but it's enjoyable enough that you'll want to go out of your way to 100% it. You connect islands together to make the map larger, and it comes together in a very satisfying puzzle piece-like way. It also has Sky Pirates, so it's an instant win. Aeterna is a game that's getting a physical release. Pre-orders are currently open for it. I heard the Switch performance wasn't great at launch. I don't know if there's been a patch. Hopefully there has been, since the game looks absolutely wonderful. Perhaps style over substance. Maybe the combat and platforming are a little bland, but that's just what I've read from some people. Others really enjoy it. The Night Witch has fast-paced shoot-'em-up style combat, which will be difficult for most Metroidvania fans to warm up to, at least straight away, and it'll push me away with its deck-building features. It feels like it was made like a hot pot, just everything chucked in. I'm surprised it doesn't have a Souls-like tag. Fans may think it's too shallow in the areas they want to enjoy, but maybe it's worth a try just to see how they blend all these genres together. Kunai was done by Limited Run Games in North America, and this is a fun little Metroidvania. With its very limited color palette, it really stands out. It's not regarded as the best out there now that time has passed since release, but if you enjoy swinging around, grappling up walls, you'll probably get some enjoyment out of this one. La Mulana 1 and 2 Collection is a double pack, only for the truest of hardcore gamer, old school to the max. These are games that heavily rely on puzzles, many of them extremely obscure. You're invited to write down clues yourself, and any urge to look up an online guide means you are entirely missing the point of the enjoyment. If you stick with it, use your brain, you'll probably come out saying that these are some of the greatest games ever made. Just put that walkthrough down. The Last Faith is an incredible looking game, some of the best dark, gloomy, gothic pixel art I've ever seen, and reviews for the gameplay are excellent too. Unfortunately, I know the Switch version had a bunch of technical problems at launch, most of which found their way onto the cartridge physical release, so as long as you don't mind a chunky patch, which I don't know if it fully fixed things, let me know below if you do own it. Maybe it's one best played on other consoles. Lost Ruins is an upcoming physical release. It's a game with slight horror elements, as you are an anime girl, a little bit of what some may call culture. It's definitely one to look forward to with its fantastic pixel art style. It may not be the smoothest game in the genre, but it will be very high on my list of games to play. Not sure why. Mega Man Zero/ZX Collection. What? Yeah. This is news to me as a non-Mega Man fan, but part of this collection includes some Metroidvania-style games. While the 4 GBA Zero games in this collection can't be considered Metroidvanias unless you're clinically insane, the 2 DS games included are. just with some Mega Man level design aspects thrown in. Maybe not first in everyone's list of Metroidvanias, but worth a shot if you're a fan and hadn't realized a legendary franchise had thrown its hat into the ring. The Messenger was previously one of the most expensive and sought after physical releases when it was released by Limited Run, with eBay asking for like $200 for a standard copy, but very soon you don't need to pay that anymore since there is a new edition coming to retail and it will include the DLC to boot. Fantastic news. This starts off like a linear Ninja Gaiden experience but morphs into a Metroidvania later on and is very highly regarded for its style, polish, and gameplay. Metroid Prime Remastered, this is why there are other 3D and FPS games on this list, because of this absolute bad boy Chad, one of the defining games of its era. The only bad thing about it is that Nintendo forgot to give us the other 2 games remastered as well, while we wait for Metroid Prime 4. Anyways, it's an essential game. It should be in your collection whether you're a fan of Metroidvanias or not. It's for fans of video games, full stop. Metroid Dread is a quintessential Metroidvania game on the system that needs no introduction. If you're watching this video because you're interested in Metroidvanias, you already have this in your collection. This game wasn't actually made by Nintendo themselves, but it definitely did the series justice, and it was the first 2D style game in the franchise in a long time. But I'm sure people wouldn't have preferred to wait so long. So I'm not going to say that the wait was worth it, but it's a great time and stands proudly amongst the greats in the series. Minoria was done by Limited Run Games in North America. This is a short-ish Metroidvania, about 6 hours or so. It's supposed to be a solid effort, but nothing crazily special, and perhaps not worth the $60 or so to find a physical copy these days. That's one reason I don't like Limited Run, because the game is just so expensive later on. Mormodora Reverie Under the Moonlight is kind of part of the same universe as Minoria, and they're made by the same company. Also, conveniently, Limited Run did this in North America too. This was one of the earlier titles, so it commands an even higher price. This is actually the 4th game in the Mormodora series, and up until recently, the only one available physically. But just as I was finishing up this video, well, Mormodora Moonlit Farewell is the latest game in the series and supposedly one of the best. With lovely presentation in its pixel art style, Limited Run Games have just started taking pre-orders for this as I'm recording, and hopefully still will have it before I get this video out, so you can actually pre-order it if you want it. Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom is a fantastic new adventure in the Wonder Boy franchise, really doing it justice and includes input from the original creator. It mixes modern with old school very well that fans will really appreciate. They didn't try to make it overly modern, so it still retains the feel of a retro release, but still looking fantastic at the same time. On the Switch, this had 2 physical releases, one at retail, while the second, via Limited Run Games, has the most complete version of it. Monster Sanctuary is a great mix of Metroidvania and monster collecting, a bit like Pokemon, so it's really unique. Don't see many side-scrollers do the, monster thing. Of course, Limited Run got their hands on this one, which is a shame because it would have been nice to have it more available because it's a fantastic game and everyone should be able to play it. Moonscars. I probably pointed out some dark, moody, gothic games in this video already, but this is the one that takes the emo biscuit because this is as dark and as gloomy as it comes. It's a Soulsvania that is very good, although after playing, you may need to visit an optometrist to make sure you haven't lost color detection in your eyes. More Cool Ragas Rage is a recent physical release on the Switch, and it's not even out on PC as of yet. I haven't seen many opinions about it, but it seems to be going for the Deadpool vibe of breaking the fourth wall, generally insulting the player, and all manner of funny things to set it apart from the rest. And the gameplay hasn't been decried as terrible or anything, so maybe add it to your collection. The Mummy Demastered is a game that sprung up out of nowhere, and despite being a short, simple Metroidvania from way forward, there is a decent amount of merit for a game that's technically a licensed tie-in. They made a licensed tie-in pretty cool. Now, Limited Run did do this physically, so paying $100 for a 5-hour Metroidvania isn't going to be worth it, but cheap digitally, why not? Nightmare Boy got a physical release in Europe, only in a collector's edition, and this was a really interesting game, mainly for its art style. I did play it many moons ago, and it was certainly not much to write home about in terms of its gameplay, with dodgy platforming and hit detection. It also had a ton of bugs and glitches when I played it at launch. I don't know if they were fixed or not. Ori the Collection is the way to go if you want the Ori games physically. They did release individually, but why buy those when you can get this very affordable double pack that is often discounted? Here you get Ori and the Blind Forest and Ori and the Will of the Wisps, two incredible AAA quality Metroidvanias that you should already have in your collection if you're a fan of the genre. Originally Xbox exclusives, they've been ported very lovingly to the Switch and is an essential package. Overlord Escape from Nazarick was done by Limited Run Games in North America, but before that, it did have a physical release in Japan, which is the more accessible way to purchase it nowadays, and it's a pretty good game, even for me who's not familiar with the Overlord franchise. In fact, it probably worked out in my favor since most fans of the series hate the main protagonist for this game. I think it's worth a look. Interesting traversal swinging around like an idiot. Yeah, good times. Phoenotopia Awakening is perhaps a bit more like Zelda 2 than a pure Metroidvania, but still belongs on this list as it's a fantastic game, and it's a chunker as well, with a 30-hour story crammed into it. Gorgeous, fun adventure. Premium Edition Games did this in North America, and it's quite difficult to get a hold of these days, so hopefully they do a reprint, at least of the standard edition, because I'm sure many people would like to buy it. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is considered to be one of the best Metroidvanias on the system, another AAA effort from Ubisoft, who consider it to have sold very badly, much to fans' dismay. A very energetic and visceral game that packs a punch. When it released, many consider it to be one of the best games of that year, and you can now often find it physically very affordably, just like any Ubisoft game after being out for 5 minutes. Pronti is one of those physical games that is very easy to forget about. It's a deep sea Metroidvania, meaning traversal is very different compared to normal. I can't imagine having a swimming mechanic for the entire game, but I've not played it myself, so I don't know how they handled the handling. This released at retail in Europe and limited run in North America. It's only thanks to this video that I remembered it exists. I realize I'm thanking myself for that. Rabi Ribi is due for a North American physical release, but it's out in Japan already, and this is a well-loved Japanese-flavored Metroidvania about bunny girls. The art style may not be universally appealing, but the gameplay is there to back it up, and this one does have a lot of fans. Worth picking up if you can get it for a reasonable price. Sadly, both Japan and North America have bloated collector's editions, meaning the price is higher than it could be. Record of Lotus War: Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth is a great little Metroidvania, perfectly constructed from Team Ladybug, randomly based on a Magna that no one thought about in 2 decades. It does a really good job of copying the Grace. It's gorgeous and fun to play, also has a polarity mechanic similar to Ikaruga, which is really interesting. The physical release is often found affordably worldwide if you wait for a sale. A Robot Named Fight. I did question putting this on the list or not since it's a roguelike, but it's a very well-loved game that wears its Metroid heart on its sleeve. It has procedural generation, which you may think takes away from the genre, and it kinda does, but it also kinda works in its favor if you're in the mood for it. Premium Edition Games did this in North America, but I believe it's out of print now. Rogue Legacy 2. Now, I am not an expert, but after browsing for opinions, this one is tagged as a Metroidvania, while the original game is not. I don't know why. I have no opinion on this game or the series, except I know they are universally loved. Every time you die, your children take over from you. I'm handing over my YouTube passwords to my daughter as I speak. Limited Run did this in North America, and for what it's worth, they did the first game too. Rusted Moss is an import-exclusive physical release with English. This is a decently regarded title that's got a little bit of Umihara Kawase about it, as you swing around with a grappling hook and you have a twin-stick movement, so it's kind of like a twin-stick shooter almost, with your massive rifle. Not my kind of game, but it's an affordable import if you want to try a Metroidvania that's enjoyed by many. Salt and Sanctuary is a Souls-like Metroidvania where you have over 600 weapons to craft and upgrade. It's tough, unforgiving, not welcoming, but it's supposed to be like that. There's no map as far as I've read, unless there was an update, so yeah, it's an acquired taste. Just like the high price for the physical right now, but if it gels with you, you will really love it. Shantae is a series that is blessed on the Nintendo Switch, but cursed thanks to Limited Run having their dibs on most of the series physically. But if you got in early, great for you. Many consider these to be some of the best put together indie Metroidvanias filled with personality. Okay, maybe not all of them are true Metroidvanias, but I'll just stick all the series in here, why not? The ones I've played are very good stuff, and I would expect more in the future. The ones that are available at retail, let me just say, are Half Genie Hero and Seven Sirens. The others are 100% limited run. Sheepo has a rather unappealing name, but you are a shape-shifting sheep who doesn't directly engage in combat with enemies. There is a bigger focus on platforming, and it's an interesting, if not particularly life-changing experience. It's also pretty short. Limited Run did this in North America. Silver Axe the Honest Elf was only released physically in Singapore, but it does have English. This wasn't a game that was highly publicized, being announced and released within a couple of weeks late last year, and according to reviews the reception is pretty mixed, but at least the physical does come with the DLC content. I don't think it's worth the high price tag though. Scoutfold Usurper was released in the Scoutfold Double Pack. The series is known for shifting genres, which is very commendable and probably keeps the developer on their toes. This Metroidvania edition has a focus on timing your attacks. The riskier you are, the more rewards you get in terms of dealing damage. Supposedly very entertaining. Songbird Symphony got a budget physical release in Europe. This has rhythm game elements to match the musical theme as you are a cute little bird on a journey. It's a really short game, about like 4 hours, and is mostly worth it digitally if you can get it for a few bucks. The physical may be a step too far, but people who play it generally on the whole like it. Soldiers is a great game, but not the best running game on the Switch, with a myriad of technical issues getting in the way of a classic. And I believe it's not just on the Switch, even the PC version still has issues after all these years, which is a shame because it's a fun game with great visuals. It released in Europe via Pixel Love, but also got a Japanese physical release. SteamWorld Dig Fistful of Dirt and SteamWorld Dig 2, both games are diggingvanias, some of the most relaxing games on this list. It really does feel like proper exploration, like you are a pioneer discovering new places deep down. Originally, SteamWorld Dig 2 got a retail release by itself, but much later on, Super Red Games decided to release the first game physically, and nicely enough, they put the second game on the cartridge too, so it's a nice double pack, even if it was unnecessary. That's nice of them. Super Epic The Entertainment War is a Roguevania technically, but the developers firmly put the phrase Metroidvania in the first sentence of their blurb, so here it is. It's a humor-filled game that has a raccoon riding a llama with weapons such as a stop sign and a swordfish. Yeah, the physical is often found dirt cheap these days and is worth picking up if you see it for like 15 or 20 bucks. Superland is one of those, you really put this one on the list? Yes, I did, because people told me to, and I'm easily swayed when it comes to things I know nothing about. I mean, the first line in the blurb on Steam says Superland is a first-person Metroidvania puzzle game, and it also proudly states its terrible combat. A bit of a tongue-in-cheek game, but it is considered a really good game by all who have played it. It was distributed physically by Limited Run Games in North America. Sword of the Vagrant is a Vanillaware-inspired action game that doesn't come close to the heights of that developer, but still pretty good game as far as I'm aware. Interestingly, it has a different name depending on the platform. If you want this on Steam, you'll have to search for The Vagrant rather than Sword of the Vagrant. I don't know why. Limited Run did this in North America, whereas Red Art Games did it in Europe. Guess which one's cheaper? Teslagrad is a cool little Metroidvania. I played this on my Wii U a long time ago, so it's a bit of an old one in terms of, indies. And in fact, since this physical release, there has been a remastered version of the game released digitally, so the physical is kind of out of date. Not that there's anything wrong with the original, steampunk style platformer, but still would have been nice to have the best version possible. Tevi is from the same developers as Rabi Ribi, and you can really tell in the art style. You got a chibi bunny girl. It's a pretty long Metroidvania too. Looking at the visuals, it looks like one of those 2-hour indie games on the 3DS eShop, but no, it's a proper fat game. Now, most people say it's not as good as Rabi Ribi, with most of the complaints about the inconvenient map traversal, which, I don't know, isn't that just like part of the game? Time Spinner was an early-ish limited run release on Switch, so prices are quite high right now for a physical copy, which is a shame because this is a really good one that has time traveling. Okay, like many indies, it's a bit too short for its own good. One of the main mechanics is freezing time, which is one of my favorite powers when it comes to video games. We need more time-stopping tomfoolery in video games. Touhou Lunar Nights has had a few physical editions, firstly in Japan, then a little bit later in Europe, and in April, North America is getting a physical release too. And they're still insisting on using the terrible artwork for what is a beautiful, elegant game. This is one of the best indie Metroidvanias, and I would go out on a limb and say it's probably the best Touhou fan game out there. Any objections to that? Transi-Ruby, I don't know if I'm saying this correctly. This is a simple, supposedly comfy Metroidvania with a bright art style, and you can see it's got a distinctive art style to connect it to Kamiko and the Fair Rune series, also known as cheap, effective indie games. This is slightly more ambitious than those, but it's probably not going to appeal to those who like Souls-like difficulty. It's quite an easy one. The physical was done by Super Rare Games in Europe quite a while back now. Treasures of the Aegean, I don't think fully integrates the Metroidvania pigeonhole, but it's close enough. There's not enough combat or RPG elements to get most people on board. It's fully about the exploration in this one with a minimum amount of power to help you in your adventure, which has an interesting time mechanic that some of you will either love or hate. If you like platforming aspects, parkour and that stuff, you should probably give this one a shot. Turbo Kid is a game from Premium Edition Games, recently put up for pre-order for the physical release on the Switch. It's crazy this game even exists considering it's a licensed tie-in for an indie movie that came out many years beforehand, but it's a stroke of genius because the game just works. You can summon a BMX at the press of a button and zip around the map like a badass. It's very satisfying. Unsighted is a top-down action game which may be atypical to the genre, but many people are very enthusiastic about this as a Metroidvania, many saying it's one of the best, although it does have a timer, which is usually an instant no-go for many gamer unless it's a level-by-level platformer. And it doesn't matter how overly generous the timer is or how hard you'd have to try to even let the timer run out, some people just cannot handle the thought. That seems to be the only negative of the game, and the physical release of this was done by Limited Run. Vernal Edge is a fast-paced Metroidvania that has you dashing all over the place, but is also combat-focused with lots of customization in terms of attacking enemies. A lot of people have compared it to Devil May Cry in its fighting system, which can only be a compliment. I also adore the occasional attempt at 3D with some adorable Nintendo DS-style visuals. The Wonder Boy Collection probably has some Metroidvanias in there, right? I feel like there has to be, and I can't be asked to properly check. They are old school enough, around the same time as Metroid itself, and this has had two slightly different releases. The retail edition has the 4 essential main games, whereas the one from Strictly Limited Games has those alongside some deeper cuts, making it the better one to own if you can find it for a good price, which you won't. Wonder Boy: The Dragon's Trap is a remake of the 3rd game in the series, and it's a beautiful game. Since it's essentially just a visual upgrade, you still have the core gameplay and its programming underneath, meaning it looks gorgeous but plays very retro, which some people may not enjoy, but I think it's definitely worth picking up. I really like this game. Zeo Drifter has had 2 physical releases. Both are kinda dirt cheap nowadays, or at least they have been at times. First, Red Arc Games did this in Europe, then many years later, Limited Run decided to do it for no reason I can find sense in. But anyways, this is the kind of game that I described earlier, the one that you'd find on the 3DS eShop as a download and it lasts 2 hours. This is it, but it is a fun 2 hours, so it's okay. Yars Rising was a surprising game from last year. Apparently it's really good, although that could be WayForward Simps overhyping it. It's entirely possible because the trailer looked terrible. Anyways, Yars is back, and it's not even an arcade game, it's a Metroidvania with a kick-ass, overly witty protagonist. I just think it's cool to see franchises like this be reborn, something different. Yohane the Parhelion Blazed in the Deep Blue is an import-exclusive Metroidvania. If you want the physical, you'll have to buy the Japanese edition, which does have English. And this is a short, simple Metroidvania in the Love Live series, a spin-off anyways, where Yohane delves into a dungeon to rescue her friends, who in turn become the powers that she uses. Pretty fun concept, especially for the fans of the franchise. Personally, I'm not, but I still enjoyed this. Yoku's Island Express is one of the weirdest games in this list, so a decent one to end on, because this is a Metroidvania pinball game and it just works surprisingly well as you slam your little dude around the map. Of course, it does have its occasional frustrations that come with pinball, but they did a great job in mitigating those moments as much as possible. As far as early Switch indie gems, this is one that's right up there. It feels old hat to recommend this, people, so far into the Switch's life, but it's still worth it despite its age. That is a lot of Metroidvania. Let me know if I missed one that you love, and I'll be sure to include it in the next one that I make of this video, maybe in 3 years' time. As long as it fits, of course. If you want to purchase any of these games, please use the links below. That massively helps me out. I greatly appreciate it. You can join the Patreon to get these videos ad-free. And if you found the video useful, leave a like, leave a comment, at least one that doesn't sound like a bot, and also subscribe. Have a great day.